You know, one of our priests in Pampanga was telling me the other day about a young deacon in the archdiocese whose mother was rushed to the hospital because of severe COVID symptoms. Like most COVID patients, the mother was admitted. Buti nga na-admit siya because I hear that lately it is very hard to get admitted in any of the hospitals in Manila. She was admitted, but she was not allowed to have a single member of her family to accompany her in her hospital room. For many Filipinos, this is one of the horrors of being hospitalized for COVID. The idea of being alone on a hospital bed in these difficult moments, and God forbid, also the idea of dying alone and being hurriedly cremated. It must be one of the reasons why our COVID mortality rate in the Philippines is so high. The psychological factor that raises the anxiety level of patients. Apparently, the young deacon spoke heart to heart with the doctor about the family's concern about leaving their mother alone in such a critical condition. The doctor explained that it was normally not allowed, but within the circumstances, and given the fact that their hospital was so understaffed and their nurses had to look after so many patients simultaneously, he said perhaps he could consider allowing it on one condition. Not only would the assisting family member have to take all the necessary precautions, including wearing a PPE like the regular health workers. He would have to be willing also to sign a waiver stating that the hospital would not be held accountable in case the assisting family member also got infected by COVID-19. Well, it did not take much time for the deacon to read the waiver form. He himself signed it immediately and said he was going to do the assisting himself. Siya mismo ang mag-a-accompany sa nanay niya. Well, he is still there at this very moment. The priest who was telling me the story said the deacon had been excused temporarily from performing a deacon's ministry while looking after his mother. I reacted and I said, but what he's doing for his mother now is also what the diaconate is really about. When he says, I want to assist my mother no matter what the cost might be, he is being a real diakonos, meaning a servant. On this evening of the Lord's Supper, I thought of the signing of that waiver as a good equivalent to the washing of the feet that we're not even able to ritualize during this pandemic. I imagine, let's say, an aunt or an uncle of that deacon saying, "No, you don't do that. You're risking too much. Lalo na ikaw pa, malapit ka ng maordinahan sa pagkapare. You will never know how COVID-19 might affect you if you yourself get infected. Hindi naman siguro mapapabayaan ang nanay mo sa ospital. Why don't you just pray for her?" The equivalent of that reaction is the reaction of Peter in the gospel. Peter refuses to be washed by Jesus, and his reason sounds very noble. He did not want Jesus, whom he regarded as his teacher and master, to so demean himself. As far as Peter was concerned, Jesus was exaggerating. Sobra naman, Lord. In those days, good hosts were just expected to make some water and a towel available right at the atrium area of the house so that the guests could wash their own feet upon arrival. It was a presumed gesture of hospitality because, people usually wore open sandals and had their feet really soiled by the dust along the way. Sometimes, the more well-to-do hosts would exaggerate the hospitality by getting some slaves to wash the feet of the guests one by one. Now, what Jesus was doing was not only exaggerated for Peter, it was degrading for him. Hindi ka alipin. But was Peter really concerned about the dignity of Jesus? I don't think so. He was actually projecting himself, as Peter has on other occasions. Natatandaan ba ninyo? One time when Jesus said he was on his way to Jerusalem, where he was going to be arrested, condemned to death, and crucified. And remember how Peter reacted. He blocked the way, and he said, and you read this in Matthew 16, verse 22, "God forbid, Lord, no such thing will ever happen to you." Sometimes, even with the best of intentions, we do not realize that we are actually projecting on others our own instincts for self-preservation. By telling Jesus, "I will not allow you to wash my feet," he was actually saying, "I will never do that myself." But Jesus would explain himself to them later on. When he said 2 chapters later, "I do not regard you as slaves," because a slave does not know what his master is doing. "Instead, I call you friends." I think he also meant it the other way around, that he was doing this for them, not as a slave, but as a friend. A slave has no choice except to obey what he is being ordered to do, such as to wash the feet of the guests. Remember, I once told you in another homily, I think already last year, how slaves were even ordered to wash the butts of their Roman masters with a sponge on a stick after a toilet activity. Jesus is doing this now, washing the feet, not as a slave, but as a friend. He is not required to do this. Nobody is compelling him to do it. But he does it anyway. He does it as an act of love. Very much like the deacon's voluntary choice of signing a waiver to be able to accompany his mother. John is right in his introduction to the Last Supper scene. He says, Jesus loved his own in the world, and he loved them to the very end. Yes, he loved his own to the very end. And I must repeat my point yesterday. Yes, including Judas. Remember, he also washed the feet of Judas. Yes, he washed those feet. Those very feet that would later find their way to the chief priest's home in order to betray Jesus. Not only that, Jesus also gave him the first morsel of bread. The first morsel of bread ahead of everybody else. This man, who was his friend and counted among his own, was about to be claimed by Satan. And I think Jesus was trying to reinforce Judas for the spiritual battle. Judas is not the enemy, but Satan. You see, Satan's whole orientation was the exact opposite of that of Jesus. They say the motto of Lucifer in Latin is non serviam, meaning I will not serve. Sa Tagalog, hindi ako maglilingkod. According to apocryphal tradition, Satan was a fallen angel, and his sin was basically the sin of pride and arrogance. His dignity as an angel had gotten into his head. Lumaki ang ulo. Apparently, after God created the angels, He also created the human beings and declared the human beings to be His most precious and most special creatures because they were His image and likeness. And therefore, He commanded Satan to bow before Adam and Eve in order to show respect for them as God's image and likeness. But Satan refused to obey and insisted na una daw siya. He had been created before Adam and Eve, and that he was a more dignified creature than these creatures made out of clay. Lupa lang yan. And his declaration was, non serviam, I will not bow, I will not serve, I will not demean myself. And so what happened? He fell down from heaven. He fell out. Yes, we are dignified creatures. Yes, we must not allow ourselves or not allow others to demean us or to violate our dignity as image and likeness of God. But the irony of it all is the best way to let this dignity shine out is to voluntarily choose to take up roles that may demean our dignity or even endanger our lives, and do it as an act of love. When I was still a little boy, I remember how my late mother treated my late father. She would make him coffee every day. She would prepare warm water in a bucket for his shower. She would have his towel and even his underwear ready. Even if my father was not asking for it. And if my father asked for it, it was in the sweet, sweet tone like, "Neng, would you mind making me your usual blend of coffee that nobody else can make, please?" And then she would make the coffee with a sweet smile and say, "Sure, Deng, coffee coming." That is what lovers do. They become slaves to each other by loving each other without enslaving each other. They become voluntary slaves to each other, not by force, but through exaggerated expressions of love. This evening's supper, which the Lord asks us to keep doing in memory of Him, is a testament of that exaggerated love of God. The God who totally empties Himself in Jesus Christ. The God who takes the form of a slave and gives up His life for our redemption. And all for love of us.